I'm Janda. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Behind the Song podcast, powered by Chick-fil-A. Let me paint a picture for you. A skinny 19-year-old kid in a school uniform is about to plug in a guitar that's going to become one of the most recognizable sounds in rock history. Standing next to him is a small, wiry Scotsman with a gap-toothed grin, a voice like gravel dragged over broken glass, and a criminal record longer than some people's resumes. That's Angus Young and Bon Scott. And today, we're talking about the song and the album that this unlikely partnership was about to unleash on the world. Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. This is a hell of a good story. A band that almost got dropped by their own record label, a phone number that got an innocent Illinois couple hundreds of prank calls, and a frontman who wouldn't live to see this record become the hit it deserved to be in America. Let's get into it. And if you like this episode, you know what to do. Give it a like and hit subscribe. So by early 1976, AC/DC already had two Australian albums under their belt, High Voltage and TNT, and they were becoming a genuine phenomenon back home. But they were also exhausted. The late Malcolm Young talked about this years later in interviews. His memory of the period was basically, after High Voltage, they never stopped touring. Then their new label told them, congratulations, now go make another record. And there was barely any time to do it. The band would literally finish a gig at night, then head straight to the studio to knock out ideas. That's the environment Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap was born in. Not some carefully planned, well-rested studio retreat, but a band running on fumes, cranking out songs between shows. Produced once again by Harry Vanda and George Young, Angus and Malcolm's older brother. Vanda and Young were songwriting and production partners who produced many bands out of Australia, most notably AC/DC. Now, here's a detail I love. Where does the phrase, dirty deeds done dirt cheap, come from? It sounds like something a con man would say, and actually, that's exactly right. It comes from an old American cartoon called Beanie and Cecil, which Angus watched as a kid. There's a villain in that show named Dishonest John, and he carries around a business card. It's a con man's calling card, offering his services on the cheap with special rates for Sundays and holidays. Angus loved that line so much, he brought it to the band, and they built an entire song around it. Bon playing the role of a shady fixer character who'll take care of your problems for the right price. A crooked headmaster giving you trouble? He can help. A cheating partner? He's got a solution for that too. It's basically a dark little comic sketch set to a riff, and that's very on brand for what AC/DC was doing in this era. There's a real sense of humor running through this whole record, even when the subject matter gets a little menacing. With that in mind, let's take a walk through the lyrics of this song. If you're having trouble with the high school head, he's giving you the blues. You want to graduate but not in his bed, here's what you gotta do. Pick up the phone. I'm always home. Call me anytime. Just ring 362436. Hey, I lead a life of crime. Dirty deeds done dirt cheap. Dirty deeds and they're done dirt cheap. Okay, so in the song, Bon Scott gives out that number. He sings it as a set of digits that, back in the 60s, was an actual working phone number in Australia. It also happens to double as a description of a particular kind of shapely figure. You can do the math on 36, 24, 36. A very Bon Scott kind of double entendre. But fast forward to 1981 when the album finally comes out in the United States, and we'll get to why that took almost 5 years in a minute. And there's a couple in Libertyville, Illinois named Norman and Marilyn White. Their actual home phone number was extremely close to the digits in the song. It was 362-4368, especially once you count in the hey in the vocal as sounding like the number 8. And AC/DC fans, being AC/DC fans, started dialing it. This poor couple got flooded with what their lawyer described as lewd and threatening phone calls, and they actually sued Atlantic Records and the distributors for $250,000. It's one of those stories that sounds made up, but it's very real. A totally unintended consequence of writing a hit song with real digits in it. Back to the lyrics. You've got problems in your life of love? You got a broken heart? He's double dealing with your best friend. That's when the teardrops start, fella. Pick up the phone. I'm here alone. Or make a social call. Come right in. Forget about him. We'll have ourselves a ball. Dirty deeds done dirt cheap. Dirty deeds, and they're done dirt cheap. And the jobs just get crazier and crazier for the entrepreneur in this tale. No job too big or small, like in the next verse. If you got a lady and you want her gone, but you ain't got the guts, she keeps nagging at you night and day, enough to drive you nuts. Pick up the phone. Leave her alone. It's time you made a stand. For a fee, I'm happy to be your backdoor man. Dirty deeds done dirt cheap. Dirty deeds, and they're done dirt cheap. Near the end of the song, Bon Scott gets into the tools of the trade. Concrete shoes, cyanide, TNT, neckties, contracts, high voltage. Dirty deeds, done dirt cheap. And then the song ends with that unmistakable Bon Scott wail, which we have all very likely yelled into our steering wheels at one point or another. Let's talk about the man delivering all this, because Bon Scott was truly one of rock's great characters. Real name, Ronald Belford Scott. Before AC/DC, he'd already lived what felt like several lives. He'd been in a mod pop band called the Valentines. He'd done time, literally, in a juvenile detention facility as a teenager for a string of minor offenses. Let's just list a few. Giving a false name and address to the police. Escaping legal custody. Having unlawful carnal knowledge. And stealing 12 gallons of gas. He tried at one point to join the Australian Army, but was rejected on the basis of their determination that he was socially maladjusted. Perfect recipe for a rock star in the 70s. By the time he joined AC/DC in 1974, he was already in his late 20s, older than the Young brothers, and honestly, he was not the band's original pick. He actually knew the group first as a driver and occasional helper before stepping up to the mic. What made Bon special wasn't just the voice, although that snarl, that scream, became the blueprint for hard rock singers. It was that he was a genuinely witty lyricist, hiding behind a very blunt, dirty joke exterior. AC/DC biographer Murray Engelhart has written that songs on this album were almost character studies of Bon himself, a sense of restlessness, of loneliness underneath all the bravado. You hear it most clearly on Ride On, the moody number that closes the record, where Bon sings about a guy drowning his mistakes at the bottom of a glass. Of course, we now know Bon Scott died in February of 1980, found unresponsive in a car in London after a night of heavy drinking at just 33 years old, which makes the timing of everything we're about to get into about this record even stranger. The story gets really wild from a music business standpoint. Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap comes out in Australia in September of 1976, and internationally in Europe and New Zealand a couple months later that same year. But it does not come out in the United States, not in 1976, not in 77. Atlantic's American division actually looked at this record and said no. According to Phil Carson, the Atlantic executive who'd originally signed the band, the U.S. side of the label told him flatly they weren't putting it out, and they were ready to drop AC/DC entirely. Carson had to go over their heads, straight to the label heads at Atlantic, and basically beg for the band's career using the modest sales numbers from High Voltage as his evidence. He managed to save the deal, but Dirty Deeds itself stayed shelved in America. So this album just sits there for years, while AC/DC builds their reputation with Let There Be Rock, Powerage, and then the breakthrough of Highway to Hell in 1979. American fans start hunting down import copies. And then, of course, Back in Black explodes in 1980, and importers can't keep up with demand for this mysterious older album called Dirty Deeds that nobody in the U.S. had heard yet. So finally, in early 1981, Atlantic caves and gives it an official American release, a full 5 years after it originally came out and more than a year after Bon Scott had already died and been replaced by Brian Johnson. One biographer, Jesse Fink, quotes Phil Carson calling the timing of that release one of the most crass decisions ever made by a record company executive, because it ended up competing directly with the brand new AC/DC album, For Those About to Rock, We Salute You, which was released that same year with Brian Johnson on vocals. The label was basically cannibalizing its own new release to cash in on a 5-year-old record. So let's talk numbers, because this is an insane chart story. Back home in Australia, when the album first came out in September of '76, it did well, but not sensationally by AC/DC's own standards, peaking at around number 5 on the old Kent Music Report chart, the main sales chart in Australia then. It stuck around for a good while, several months. Solid for a young hard rock band, but not their biggest domestic smash. TNT, the year before, had actually charted a little higher. Now, flip over to the United States 5 years later. When Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap finally gets its American release in 1981, riding the wave of Back in Black mania, it goes straight in at number 3 on the Billboard 200. Number 3, a 5-year-old album recorded when the band was broke and exhausted between gigs, suddenly becomes one of the biggest selling records in the country. It's since been certified 6 times platinum in the U.S., making it the 3rd highest-selling AC/DC album in America, behind only Highway to Hell and the completely massive Back in Black. It's also been certified 6 times platinum back home in Australia, so in the end, this odd, delayed, almost shelved record became a multi-platinum monster on both sides of the ocean, just on very different timelines. What strikes me most about this whole story is the gap between how the song was made and how it ended up living in the world. It was written in a hurry by a band that wasn't even sure their label wanted them anymore. The frontman singing it wouldn't live to see it become a hit in America. And yet, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap has outlasted almost everything else from 1976. It's still a setlist staple. It's been covered by artists like Joan Jett, and that central riff is one of the most instantly identifiable in hard rock. Bon Scott never got to see this album's second life. But every time that title gets chanted at a stadium show, 40, 50 years later, some piece of that scrappy little band from 1976 is still very much alive. Thanks for listening to this episode of Behind the Song. If you liked it, share it with a rock fan in your life. That's always the best way to share music. Special thanks to Christian Lane for the music you hear on these podcast episodes. You can find me on the air at Classic Rock 97.1 The Drive in Chicago, and on the way, much more classic rock and roll. Great news! Chick-fil-A Catering makes summer party planning easy. Choose from a variety of trays, including Chick-fil-A nuggets, mac and cheese, and chocolate fudge brownies. These party favorites are perfect for your summertime gatherings. Place your order through the Chick-fil-A app, online, or by calling ahead to pick up your order at your local Chick-fil-A restaurant, or get it delivered directly to your door. Take cooking off your plate this season and enjoy Chick-fil-A Catering. Availability and order requirements vary. See restaurant for details. Chick-fil-A. Eat more chicken.